And this template can help you do that. And then your job is to build a talk. Okay. So this is a effective talk, right? There's an opening, there's a middle of the talk, there's some concluding information. Okay. And as you build that talk, this problem solution approach isn't necessarily it's not necessarily going to be the first sentence, but it's going to be the end of the introduction. You're going to do something in your introduction that gets you there. And then you're going to do your talk. Background, knowledge gap, hypothesis, methodology, results, discussion. That's all in the body of your talk. Could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes, could be 2 hours. Okay. And then you're going to close by talking about the difference this makes in the future. The difference doing this work has changed what the future will look like. What does that change look like? What is that change? Okay. It's a very simple, it's a very simple structure, but it's very different than the way a journal article is structured. Structuring the way a journal article is structured when that's not the way people consume information doesn't work. Journal articles are structured very strategically the way they are, so we can go find the information that we need. But that's not what you're doing in a presentation. Presentation, you're giving people information. So you need to figure out the story. You need to figure out this simple understanding and then build the complexity. Not give all the people all the complexity and then try and explain it to them, which is what most people do. We give you all the different background, which is incredibly complex. There's 4, 5, 6 different pieces of it. And then we try and bring it all together and make sense of it. It's backwards. We need to make sense of something and then build complexity. Okay. For the most part, people are doing this exactly the wrong way. So what does this do? I call this something. So a lot of people talk about story, right? I could do a whole workshop on story, incredibly important. Okay. But there's something else that I call A and Q. It's simply answers and questions, right? I tell you something and now you want to know more. So I did that in the beginning of this workshop. I told you that most people think the difference between a good presentation and not a good presentation is delivery. Most people think it's a delivery problem. If I was just more confident, if my voice was better, then my presentation would be better. And it's not true. Now you're like, okay, what is true then? It's content problem. Talks about the content. Okay, how do I solve that problem? I just gave you something to solve that problem. Oh, but he also said voice and body language actually are important. Oh, okay. Let's talk about those, right? So I didn't give you a table of contents. I didn't give you a table of contents. But I triggered questions and curiosity about different things that were to come. I foreshadowed versus giving you a table of contents. Don't give people a table of contents, but do foreshadow. Okay, so then in the body of this, and I'm gonna give you a quick example of this. I'm actually going to talk about the 3-minute talk that won the North American Championship as a second example here. But as you go through this and you add intention to the rest of your talk, these are some of the things you need to think about, right? You need to think about connection, comprehension, credibility, and your goal. Those are the 4 big ones. And then these are some of the questions that you need to ask in order to strategically make sure that you're answering those things, right? Credibility. Why should they trust me? Why should they trust me? Right? So I got some of that work done for me in the introduction. The introduction, you heard that I've given 500 workshops, that I've worked with 10,000 speakers, that one of the speakers I worked with won the North American Championships. So that's all credibility building, right? It's all credibility building. I didn't even have to do it. Someone else did it for me. So you need to think about that as you go through your talk. How do you build in credibility? How do you build some of the credibility is explaining the logic behind the work, right? The logic of building a presentation the way you would consume a presentation rather than the way a journal article is written, which has a very different purpose. Logos, pathos, ethos. For those who are familiar with ancient Greek, this has been around for a long time. This is not new. This is just good, solid communication practice. Okay. All right. So this is the talk that won the North American Championships. It was about preventing leishmaniasis, which is it's a parasite, but it creates scarring of the face that you see here, right? And this talk started not with, look how smart I am. I had figured out a way to solve a disease called leishmaniasis. Started talk by introducing Aisha, who's the young girl that you see here, and telling Aisha's story. Because that's how we understand things. If I tell you leishmaniasis is a disease that scars millions of children a year and they suffer for having to live through those scars for the rest of their life, if they're lucky enough to not die from it, that's a big picture, right? That's background information. It's statistics. It's compelling, sort of, because we don't really know what scars look like, and we don't really know how many people 2 million people is, and we don't really connect to 2 million people, and we don't really, there's a whole bunch of things there that don't touch us. But Aisha touches us. An individual touches us. That's connection. Now we understand what's going on. Okay, it's a parasite that causes scars. How do we prevent it? Now we can get into it. It actually turns out, in this case, that the story is not about building a new drug. The drug used to work. It's about overcoming the drug resistance that has happened because the drug's been being used now for the last 50 years. And the parasites become drug resistant. So that's the next piece, right? Like now that I know, now that there's a problem that I want to help solve, how do we do it? Well, we already have a drug. Well, what's wrong with the drug? Well, there's drug resist. The parasites become resistant to the drug. Well, what can we do about it? My name's Atya, and I'm going to tell you what we can do about it. That's where you introduce your name. That's where you introduce your name, not in the beginning. You introduce your name when you get to the work that you're doing. You introduce your name when we want to know your name, not before you start. Okay.